Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about array functions in JavaScript. So you saw me doing something when I was creating random data before. Let's do that trick again. So basically, when you create a new array, you can create arrays from different formats or in different mediums. And one of the ways is like you can create an array for 30 positions like this, and that returns a list of elements like that. Now, if you want to start generating something inside that, then you can use an array function called map. And what map does, it's that it actually takes each one of these elements and then it passes that as a parameter, and then it applies a function to that and it replaces the element with whatever attribute I provide. So in this case, I'm passing a new object, and then I can say name equals John, as I was saying before. And then the age can be, as I was doing, mat random multiplied by 120. Mat random returns a number between 0 and 1, and then multiplying it by 120, what I get are different ages or random numbers between 0 and 120. So again, what's happening in here is that this is returning an array of 30 positions, and then just by doing this, I am mapping for each one of those elements and replacing and returning actually an object. So the other thing you can do is that, remember, like the second parameter for whatever you pass in there is going to be an index, and that index, it's going to be useful in here. Like for instance, I can say something like this. Okay, let's get fancier. Let's say, for instance, that I want to, or have a simpler example. Let's imagine that I have another array, and in this case I have 5 numbers, something like that. So if you want to apply map on that, so basically what you do is you do map. Again, you pass a function. That function like can have or not have any parameters. For instance, if I say map 0, then it's going to have 5 zeros because this one has 5. If I remove or start adding elements, then it's going to be having the same. Remember, this is reactive, so every time I run, I change this parameter or this cell, this one also changes. So as of now, I'm just replacing each one of those with a 0. So I can be replacing each one of those with the double of the value that they have. Or for instance, that one minus 0 or something like that. This is, for instance, interesting for finding odd numbers, for instance. So I can say if this one is equal 0, then it's telling me if the number is even or odd. Okay, so that is map. And again, what it's doing is that it's applying to each one of the elements. Now, another one that it's very similar but serves different purpose, it's filter. So what you can do with filter is that, again, you pass the parameter, and then what you do in there is it's also a function, takes d in this case, and you say what is this going to return. So in this case, you can say, for instance, only give me the people that have an age greater than 100. And then just by doing that, it's telling me that actually in that random data that I generated, there were 6 people that had that big age. So this will return also an array. Is not modifying the other one. This one isn't modifying here. And it's actually, so this could be like filtered data, and then I can save it in here. Something important to take in mind, to keep in mind in here, is that if you, for instance, do a modification, let's say that I say data 2, and then I say I want to filter things that are, again, odd, 0. And then now you can see this one is returning only the ones that are even, versus map that was returning true and false for each one of those. So very much what you do is that you use map when you want to construct a new array out of the previous one. And that's exactly what we were doing here with this when we were creating the data. And then you use filter when you actually want to create an element or actually like filter the data and find which ones follow a parameter. So the key in here is that whatever filter returns, should be returning true or false. And then instead what map returns, it's something that should be creating a new object if you want to create objects like this, or whatever you're returning here is what it's going to be inserting in each one of the elements. So the third function for this, it's called reduce, and then that one is a little bit harder to understand, but let's go with this one. Then you say I'm going to use reduce, and then the whole idea of this is that it's again a function. Whatever you pass in there is going to be a parameter that it's going to be used to reduce the whole array into one parameter, whatever you pass in there, depending on how you initialize. So this one takes two parameters, like the previous value and d, for instance. One of the things you could do is that you can say, I'm going to take the previous value, and then I'm going to sum it with d. And then basically what we are doing in there is just adding up all of these values. So let's make this a little bit smaller just so I can sum it up on my head. So now you can see that these ones sum up to 10. Okay. Now, if you wanna do reduce with other type of things, then you can also provide what is the parameter that you want to start with. Like usually I think it starts with 0. The other thing you can do is that you can, let's say what happens when I do this. So actually what I'm doing in there is that I started with a empty array. So it actually just concatenated the things. And I guess it's the same that if I start with string. Because since it looked at that, then it started with this. So the first time it was called, previous was a string, and then adding up with d, it converted d to a string and then did the addition. So you can use it for this type of things. Usually can also be used, for instance, for computing averages and things like that. But in those cases, you want to have like the total number of elements. I think you can have a third parameter, for instance, here. Let's say that you start in 0, so we guarantee that this is okay. And then, not sure if this is correct, but let's go for it. So one of the things I can do is that I can say I'm going to add the numbers and then divide it, of course, by the length of all the elements. And then, of course, I'm getting all. So now I better go and check MDN reduce documentation just to see what are the parameters. So as you can see in here, it takes an accumulator, the current value, the index, and then all the array. So it takes 4 parameters. So it's I and then the whole array. So closing fingers for improvising in here. So yes, so that's telling me the average of that. So those are 3 basic functions. They're going to be used all the time, and especially with D3, and it's used also in JavaScript. So I recommend you learning more about that. You can also, I recommend you taking a look at each one of the functions in here, especially here in the array functions, so you can master them. So go and practice them so you can be an expert on those too.